The dust kicked up like a veil of gold in the merciless afternoon sun. As Sarah Blackwell's bloodied wrists burned against the coarse rope, dragging her body across the blistering desert floor. Each rock, each cactus spine, each moment of consciousness was agony as she struggled to keep her head up, away from the worst of the terrain tearing at her dress and skin. Montana Territory, 1877. The vast expanse of unforgiving wilderness stretched beyond the horizon, indifferent to human suffering. Sarah had never imagined her life would come to this, being dragged to her death behind a horse ridden by the man she once trusted. 24 hours earlier, she had been working peacefully at her father's general store in Juniper Springs, a small settlement nestled at the edge of the Montana prairie. At 22, Sarah was known throughout the region for her steady hand with accounts and her even steadier nerve when dealing with difficult customers. Her father, Harold Blackwell, had built the store from nothing after moving west following the war, and Sarah had grown up among the barrels of flour, hanging tools, and neat shelves of canned goods. "Miss Blackwell," a voice had called out as she swept the porch that morning. "Fine day, ain't it?" She looked up to see Jared Hawkins, a local rancher's son, grinning down at her from atop his chestnut mare. His eyes had that familiar gleam that made her uncomfortable. "Mr. Hawkins," she acknowledged with a nod, continuing her sweeping. "What brings you to town today?" "Your father ordered some fence posts. Pa sent me to tell him they'll be ready next week." Hawkins swung down from his horse, landing too close to her. "But I really came to see if you'd reconsidered my proposal." Sarah stiffened. "As I've said before, I'm not interested in marriage at this time." Hawkins' smile faltered. "A pretty girl like you shouldn't be so choosy. What are you waiting for? Some fancy Eastern gentleman to come sweep you off your feet?" Before she could respond, the store door opened and her father emerged, account book in hand. "Ah, Jared, good to see you. How's your father?" The conversation shifted to business matters, and Sarah retreated inside, unaware that her rejection had planted a seed of malice in Hawkins' mind that would blossom into violence by nightfall. Later that evening, after closing the store, Sarah headed to the small house she shared with her father at the edge of town. Harold had gone to play cards with friends, leaving her alone with her thoughts and a copy of Wuthering Heights borrowed from the schoolteacher. The knock at the door came just as she was lighting the lamps. "Who is it?" she called, approaching cautiously. "It's me, Miss Blackwell, Jared Hawkins. There's been an accident with your father." Her heart lurched as she hurried to open the door. Hawkins stood there, hat in hand, looking grave. "What's happened? Is he hurt? He took a fall at the saloon. He's asking for you. I've got my horse outside. I'll take you to him." Without hesitation, Sarah grabbed her shawl and followed him into the gathering darkness. Only when they were well outside of town, riding double on his horse, did she realize something was wrong. They weren't heading toward the saloon, but out toward the open prairie. "Mr. Hawkins, where are we going?" "The saloon is back in town." His arm tightened around her waist. "Your father's fine, Sarah. It's you and me who need to have a conversation." Fear gripped her as she tried to wriggle free. "Stop this horse immediately and take me home." Instead, he spurred the animal faster. "A woman needs to know her place. You've embarrassed me for the last time with your refusals." The struggle that followed was brief but fierce. Sarah clawed at his face, drawing blood before he struck her hard enough to make her head swim. When she came to, they were deep in the desert, and Hawkins was binding her wrists with rope. "Since you won't be my wife willingly," he snarled, "I'll make sure no one else will want you either. A few miles of dragging ought to teach you some humility if it doesn't kill you first." That had been hours ago. Now, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, Sarah felt her strength ebbing. Her dress was in tatters, her back and legs a mass of cuts and bruises. Hawkins occasionally looked back, slowing his horse to check if she was still conscious before continuing his cruel procession. "Ready to reconsider my offer?" he called back after one such pause. Sarah, her throat parched and raw, managed to croak out a defiant "never." His face contorted with rage. "Then die out here, you stubborn witch!" He kicked his horse into a gallop, and Sarah couldn't hold back her scream as her body bounced violently over the rough terrain. Through her pain-hazed vision, she thought she saw movement on a distant ridge, a rider perhaps. But it was probably just a mirage, a desperate hope conjured by her failing mind. No one knew where she was. No one was coming to save her. The desert seemed to stretch endlessly, and Sarah felt consciousness slipping away when a sudden crack split the air. A gunshot. Then another. Hawkins' horse reared in panic, and Sarah felt herself being dragged in a chaotic circle before coming to an abrupt halt. Through swollen eyes, she saw Hawkins topple from his saddle, clutching his shoulder. A tall figure approached on horseback, dismounting in one fluid motion. The newcomer's face was shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat, but she could see the glint of a still-smoking revolver in his hand. "That's far enough, mister," a deep voice commanded. "Step away from the lady." Hawkins scrambled for his fallen pistol, but a third shot kicked up dust inches from his hand, stopping him cold. "Next one goes between your eyes. Your choice." With a growl, Hawkins backed away. The stranger approached Sarah carefully, kneeling beside her broken form. With a swift motion of a hunting knife, he cut through the rope binding her to the saddle. "Miss, can you hear me?" Sarah tried to respond, but only a weak moan escaped her lips. "Hold on," the man said gently. He turned back toward Hawkins, who was now attempting to climb onto his horse. "And where do you think you're going?" "This ain't your business, stranger," Hawkins spat. "That woman's my property." The stranger's voice turned ice cold. "No woman is property. And dragging someone to death behind a horse is murder in any territory." What happened next was a blur to Sarah's fading consciousness. Another gunshot, Hawkins clutching his leg as he fell, and then the stranger's arms lifting her carefully from the ground. The last thing she remembered before darkness claimed her was the steady heartbeat against her cheek as he cradled her against his chest. When Sarah awoke, she was lying on a bedroll beneath a canvas shelter. Night had fallen, and a small campfire crackled nearby. Every inch of her body throbbed with pain, but her wounds had been cleaned and bandaged. She tried to sit up and gasped as fresh agony shot through her. "Easy now," came the same deep voice from before. "You've been through hell today." The stranger moved into her line of sight, kneeling beside her with a canteen. He helped her take a few sips of water, supporting her head with a gentle hand. "Thank you," she whispered, finally getting a clear look at her rescuer. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps in his late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. A few days' worth of beard shadowed his strong jaw, and a small scar bisected his right eyebrow. "Benjamin Vance," he introduced himself. "Most folks call me Ben." "Sarah Blackwell," she managed. What happened to Hawkins, the man who was dragging you?" Ben's expression darkened. "He's tied to a tree about 50 yards that way, shot in the leg to keep him from running, but he'll live to stand trial." Sarah closed her eyes, relief washing over her. "My father, in Juniper Springs. He doesn't know where I am. Rest easy. We'll get you home soon enough, but you need to recover some strength first." He hesitated. "Miss Blackwell, what that man did to you. I've seen some cruel things in my time, but that was beyond the pale." "He wanted to marry me," she said, her voice bitter. "I refused him. Several times." Ben shook his head in disgust. "Some men can't stand being told no. That doesn't give him the right to do what he did." As Sarah took another sip of water, she noticed Ben's careful movements. "You're familiar with tending injuries." A shadow crossed his face. "Spent 2 years as a field medic during the war, saw more than my share of wounds." He checked her bandages with professional efficiency. "Nothing's broken, thankfully, though you're badly bruised and scraped up." "The worst cuts I've stitched as best I could." "Are you passing through, or do you live nearby?" she asked, trying to distract herself from the pain. "I've been drifting for a while," Ben admitted. "Was heading to Bozeman to look for work." "I've done a bit of everything: ranching, scouting, lawman for a spell in Colorado." Despite her condition, Sarah found herself studying his face, trying to read the story written there. "And what brings a drifter to this particular stretch of desert at the exact moment I needed rescuing?" A rare smile softened his features. "Providence, maybe, or just good timing. I spotted the dust trail and thought it strange, came to investigate and found that animal dragging you behind his horse." His smile vanished. "Almost put a bullet in his head right then." "I'm glad you didn't," Sarah said quietly. "I wouldn't want a good man to hang for killing scum like Hawkins." Ben's eyebrows rose slightly at her language, but he nodded. "Get some rest, Miss Blackwell. Tomorrow we'll see about getting you home." The night passed in fits of uncomfortable sleep, as Sarah's injured body protested every movement. Ben checked on her regularly, offering water and once a spoonful of laudanum from his saddlebags to ease the worst of the pain. By dawn, her fever had broken and she was able to sit up with his assistance. "What about him?" she asked, nodding in the direction where Hawkins was secured. "I'll bring him along to face justice," Ben said grimly. "From what you've told me, the marshal in Juniper Springs will have plenty to charge him with." Ben helped her onto his horse, a handsome black gelding he called Shadow, and fashioned a travois from branches to transport the sullen and now silent Hawkins. The journey back to town was slow and painful, but Sarah found comfort in Ben's steady presence and occasional gentle conversation. As they traveled, she learned that Benjamin Vance had grown up in Pennsylvania, joined the Union Army at 18, and had been wandering the Western territories since the war ended. He spoke little of his family, only mentioning a sister back east who wrote occasionally. There was a quietness about him that suggested depths of experience beyond his years. "And what about you, Miss Blackwell? Have you always lived in Juniper Springs?" he asked as they paused to rest in the shade of a rocky outcropping. "Since I was 12, she replied. "Before that, we lived in St. Louis. My mother died of typhoid and father decided to head west for a fresh start. He'd been a shopkeeper there, so he set up the general store in Juniper Springs." "Just the two of you then?" Sarah nodded. "Father never remarried, said no one could replace my mother." She smiled faintly. "He's a good man. Taught me to read ledgers before the schoolteacher taught me poetry." "Useful skill out here," Ben commented. "More useful than poetry, certainly," Sarah agreed, "though I enjoy both." They reached the outskirts of Juniper Springs by late afternoon the next day. The small town, with its single main street lined with wooden buildings, had never looked so welcoming to Sarah's eyes. People came running at the sight of them. Sarah Blackwell, torn and bandaged, riding double with a stranger, and Jared Hawkins bound and bleeding on a makeshift travois. Harold Blackwell pushed through the gathering crowd, his face ashen. "Sarah, my God, what's happened to you?" Ben helped her down into her father's arms, then quickly explained the situation while the town marshal took charge of Hawkins. The crowd's murmurs turned ugly when they heard what had been done to Sarah, and several men had to be restrained from taking immediate frontier justice on the prisoner. "You saved my daughter's life," Harold said to Ben, his voice choked with emotion. "Our home is yours for as long as you wish to stay." That evening, after the doctor had properly examined Sarah and confirmed Ben's assessment that her injuries, while extensive, would heal with time and care, the Blackwell household was quiet. Sarah rested in her bed, her father having briefly stepped out to speak with the marshal about Hawkins' impending trial. A soft knock at her bedroom door roused her from a light doze. "Come in," she called. Ben entered hesitantly, carrying a small bundle. "Your father mentioned you lost your book in the incident. I thought you might like something to read while you recover." He placed a worn copy of The Last of the Mohicans on her bedside table. "It's not poetry, but it's been good company on the trail." The simple kindness brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. "Thank you, not just for the book, but for everything. I would have died out there if you hadn't come along." Ben shifted uncomfortably under her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said firmly. "Not anyone. You risked your life for a stranger. That's rare in this world." A faint blush colored his tanned cheeks. "I should let you rest." As he turned to leave, Sarah called after him, "Will you be staying in Juniper Springs for a while?" He paused at the door. "Your father offered me work at the store until you're back on your feet. Seems I might be here for a spell." "I'm glad," Sarah said simply, and was rewarded with a brief, warm smile before he left. The weeks that followed brought gradual healing for Sarah. The physical wounds began to close and fade, though some would leave permanent scars. The nightmares came less frequently, though she still sometimes woke gasping, feeling the drag of the rope and the burn of the desert floor. Through it all, Ben's steady presence became a cornerstone of her recovery. Harold had indeed employed Ben at the general store, where his quiet competence and strength proved valuable. The townsfolk, initially curious about the stranger who had rescued Sarah Blackwell, soon accepted him as one of their own. He had a way of listening that made people trust him, and his knowledge of horses and tack brought new customers to the store. During Sarah's convalescence, Ben often brought her news of the town along with her meals. Their conversations grew longer and more comfortable as she regained her strength. She found herself watching the clock, looking forward to his visits, enjoying the way his serious expression would break into a reluctant smile at her occasional jokes. "The trial's been set for next week," Ben informed her one evening as he brought in a tray with supper. "Marshall says it's an open and shut case. Hawkins will likely hang or serve a long prison sentence." Sarah set aside her mending, a skill she was relearning as her injured hands healed. "Good, though I confess I don't relish testifying." "The whole town stands with you," Ben assured her. "No one doubts your word." "It's not doubt I fear," she said quietly. "It's reliving it all again." Ben sat in the chair beside her bed, his expression grave. "I'll be there. If it helps to look at a friendly face while you speak, look at mine." Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them, an acknowledgement of the bond that had formed through shared trauma and quiet companionship. Sarah felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her healing injuries. "Thank you, Ben," she said softly. The day of the trial arrived with a tense atmosphere hanging over Juniper Springs. The makeshift courtroom in the town hall was packed with citizens eager to see justice done. Sarah, dressed in her Sunday best, sat rigidly beside her father as the proceedings began. When the time came for her testimony, she rose on shaking legs to approach the judge's table. As promised, Ben sat in the front row, his steady gaze offering silent support. Drawing strength from his presence, Sarah recounted the horrible events clearly and without embellishment. A collective gasp rose from the spectators when she described being dragged behind the horse, and several women dabbed at tears. Hawkins, his legs still bandaged, sneered throughout her testimony. When given the chance to speak in his defense, He claimed Sarah had agreed to marry him and then changed her mind, provoking his anger. "A man has a right to discipline his woman," he declared, to outraged murmurs from the crowd. The judge, a silver-haired former jurist from Denver, was unmoved by this argument. "Mr. Hawkins, in this territory and throughout this nation, attempting to murder a woman who refuses your advances is not discipline, it is a heinous crime." He sentenced Hawkins to 20 years in the territorial prison, with the observation that he considered the punishment lenient given the circumstances. As Hawkins was led away, he lunged suddenly toward Sarah, spitting curses. Ben was on his feet instantly, stepping between them, his hand hovering near the revolver at his hip. The deputies quickly subdued Hawkins, but not before he shouted, "This ain't over, Sarah. I'll find you again someday." The threat hung in the air long after Hawkins had been removed from the courtroom. Sarah found her hands trembling as she gathered her things, and Ben noticed immediately. "He's going away for a long time," he reassured her, walking beside her as they left the town hall. "By the time he gets out, if he survives prison at all, you could be anywhere." "I know," she said, though the words brought little comfort. I thought it would feel different when it was over, more final." Ben nodded in understanding. "Some wounds take longer to heal than others. The kind you can't see often take the longest." As autumn approached, Sarah returned to working at the store, though her father insisted she take frequent breaks. Her body had healed remarkably well, though certain movements still caused her pain, and the scars on her back and legs would remain with her always. To her surprise, she found that working alongside Ben brought an unexpected joy to formerly routine tasks. They developed an easy rhythm, anticipating each other's movements, finishing each other's sentences. Customers remarked on what a good team they made, often assuming they were courting, an assumption neither hurried to correct. Harold watched the growing attachment between his daughter and her rescuer with approval, though he kept his observations to himself. One crisp October evening, as they closed the store together, Ben cleared his throat nervously. "Sarah, would you care to take a walk with me? The sunset promises to be fine tonight." It would be their first outing alone that wasn't related to her recovery or store business. Sarah felt a blush rise to her cheeks as she accepted, quickly changing her apron for a shawl. They strolled down the main street toward the small park at the edge of town, their conversation flowing easily until they reached a bench overlooking the western horizon. The sky was painted in brilliant oranges and pinks as the sun began its descent. "I've had a letter," Ben said after they'd sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, "from a friend in Bozeman. He's offering me work as a deputy marshal there." Sarah felt her heart sink. "Oh, that sounds like a good opportunity for you." "It would be steady work," Ben agreed, studying his hands. "More reliable than drifting." "When would you leave?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "That depends." He turned to face her fully, his expression unusually vulnerable. "Sarah, these past months working with you, getting to know you, they've meant more to me than I can say." Hope fluttered in her chest. "They've meant a great deal to me as well, Ben. I came to Juniper Springs by chance, but I've stayed because of you." He took a deep breath. "I care for you, Sarah, more than I thought possible, and I find myself at a crossroads." "What do you mean?" she asked softly. "I could go to Bozeman alone. Or," he hesitated, "I could ask if you might consider a future that includes me, perhaps in Bozeman, perhaps elsewhere." "Wherever life might take us." Sarah's heart raced. "Are you asking to court me, Benjamin Vance?" A smile broke across his face. "I'm doing a poor job of it, aren't I?" "Yes, Sarah Blackwell, I'm asking for the honor of courting you properly, with your father's blessing, of course." "You have mine already," she said, her voice thick with emotion. And I suspect Father's won't be hard to obtain. Ben's hand found hers on the bench between them, their fingers intertwining. I should warn you, I don't have much to offer. No land, no fortune. Just myself, and whatever future we might build together. You offered me your hand when I needed it most, Sarah replied. That's worth more than gold or acres to me. As the last rays of sunlight gilded their faces, Ben leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Instead, Sarah closed the distance between them, their lips meeting in a gentle, questioning kiss that quickly deepened with certainty. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Ben rested his forehead against hers. I never expected to find you, he whispered. Nor I you, she responded. Especially not under such circumstances. His expression sobered. I wish we could have met differently, that you hadn't suffered. The suffering brought you to me, Sarah said, touching his cheek. I can't regret that, even if I would never choose to relive it. They walked back to the Blackwell home hand in hand, both aware that they stood at the threshold of a new beginning. Harold, seeing their entwined fingers and glowing faces as they entered, merely smiled knowingly and offered Ben another serving of stew. That night, as Sarah prepared for bed, she caught her reflection in the mirror and paused. The visible scars on her collarbone and arms had faded to silvery lines, but they would always mark her skin. For the first time, she didn't view them with dismay, but rather as a testament to her survival, and to the twist of fate that had brought Benjamin Vance into her life. The courtship that followed was conducted with proper respect for convention, but infused with the depth of feeling that had already developed between them. Ben spoke with Harold formally, requesting permission to court Sarah, which was granted with enthusiasm and a hearty clap on the back. You've already proven your character, son, Harold told him. Saved my girl and helped me keep this store running smooth as silk. I'd be a fool to object. The town of Juniper Springs watched the romance unfold with collective approval. The story of how they met had become local legend, growing more dramatic with each retelling in the saloon. Ben sometimes grimaced at hearing himself described as 10 feet tall with lightning in his eyes. But he never corrected the embellishments, recognizing the town's need for heroes and happy endings. Ben wrote to his friend in Bozeman, explaining that he wouldn't be coming alone if he accepted the deputy position. The response came swiftly. Not only was the job still his for the taking, but the town was growing rapidly and needed good people like Sarah, especially those with experience in commerce. What do you think? Ben asked, showing her the letter as they sat on the porch swing one evening. Bozeman is bigger than Juniper Springs. More opportunities, perhaps, but also more challenges. Sarah considered carefully. I've only ever known St. Louis and here. A new start might be good for both of us. She hesitated. But I worry about Father. The store is his life. We've discussed that, Ben admitted. He mentioned he's been considering taking on a partner anyway. The Reynolds boy has a good head for business and has been asking to buy in. You've been plotting behind my back, Sarah accused playfully. Ben grinned. Just exploring possibilities. Your father wants what's best for you, and he grew serious again. After what happened with Hawkins, I think he likes the idea of you being somewhere new, somewhere without those memories. Sarah nodded slowly. Perhaps I do too, though I'll miss this place. It'll always be here to visit, Ben assured her, and your father has already extracted a promise that we'll come back for Christmas. Sarah raised an eyebrow. You seem very certain of your prospects, Mr. Vance. Ben's cheeks colored slightly. I'm getting ahead of myself, but I hope. That is, I've been saving what I've earned here and with the deputy's salary. He fumbled in his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. I had intended to be more eloquent about this. Sarah's breath caught as he opened the pouch and tipped a simple gold ring with a small pearl into his palm. "It was my mother's," he explained. "My sister sent it when I wrote to her about you. Sarah Blackwell, I love you more than I thought possible. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes as she looked from the ring to Ben's earnest face. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, Benjamin Vance, I will marry you." His hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as if made for her. "It's perfect," she breathed, admiring how the pearl caught the last light of evening. Ben kissed her then, a seal on their promise, his arms encircling her waist with reverent care, mindful of the scars beneath her dress. The announcement of their engagement was met with celebration throughout Juniper Springs. Plans were quickly made for a wedding in 2 weeks' time before their departure for Bozeman. The town women rallied around Sarah, helping to prepare her trousseau and decorate the church. Even Mrs. Peterson, the most formidable gossip in the territory, had nothing but praise for the match. "Romantic as anything in those novels you read," she told Sarah as they arranged flowers for the ceremony. "Rescued by a handsome stranger who turns out to be your true love. Why, it's practically Providence." Sarah smiled, thinking how much more complex their story was than the simple romance Mrs. Peterson envisioned. What she and Ben shared had been forged in fire and blood, tempered by shared trauma and healing. It wasn't the gentle courtship she might have imagined for herself as a girl, but it was real and strong and true. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, a perfect late autumn morning. Sarah stood before her mirror in the simple white dress the town seamstress had created, marveling at how different she looked from the beaten, half-dead woman Ben had found in the desert months ago. Her father knocked gently at her door. "Ready, my dear?" Harold asked, his eyes misty as he beheld his daughter. "Ready," Sarah confirmed, taking his arm. The small church was packed with well-wishers. Ben waited at the altar, looking handsome and slightly nervous in a new suit, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion. His face as she walked toward him was a study in wonder and love so pure it made her heart ache. The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. They exchanged vows in clear voices, promising to cherish and protect one another through whatever life might bring. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ben's kiss was gentle, but carried the promise of passion to come. The celebration afterward at the town hall lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing and more food than the small community could possibly consume. As the night grew late, Ben took Sarah's hand and led her away from the festivities toward the small house they would occupy for their brief time remaining in Juniper Springs, a wedding gift from her father. "Mrs. Vance," Ben said softly as they approached the porch, lit with lanterns for their arrival. "I like the sound of that." "As do I, Mr. Vance," Sarah replied, squeezing his hand. He surprised her by sweeping her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "I've been waiting all day to get you alone," he confessed, setting her down gently in the small parlor. "And now you have me," she said, suddenly shy despite the months of growing intimacy between them. Ben sensed her nervousness and took her hands in his. "We have all the time in the world, Sarah, tonight and all the nights to come." His consideration brought fresh tears to her eyes. "I love you," she whispered. "And I love you," he replied, drawing her close, "more than I have words to express." Their first night as husband and wife was a revelation of tenderness. Ben's hands, capable of violence when needed, touched her with exquisite gentleness. He kissed each scar on her body with reverence, transforming marks of pain into badges of survival. In his arms, Sarah found a healing more complete than she had thought possible, their bodies joining in a union that transcended the physical. Afterward, as they lay entwined, Sarah traced the outline of a scar on Ben's shoulder, a relic from his war days. "We're a matched set," she observed. "Both marked by our pasts." Ben caught her hand and kissed her fingertips, "but not defined by them. The future is what matters now, our future." The journey to Bozeman a week later marked the beginning of that future. They traveled by stagecoach, their possessions packed in trunks strapped to the roof. Sarah had tearfully embraced her father, promising to write often, while Ben had shaken Harold's hand with the solemn vow to care for his daughter always. As the coach pulled away from Juniper Springs, Sarah leaned against Ben's shoulder, watching the only home she'd known as an adult recede into the distance. "Nervous?" he asked, putting his arm around her. "A little," she admitted, "but mostly excited. We're building something new together." Ben kissed the top of her head. "That we are, Mrs. Vance. That we are." Bozeman in 1877 was a growing frontier town, strategically located in a fertile valley and serving as a hub for travelers and settlers heading to the Northern Territories. When Ben and Sarah arrived, they found a bustling community with a main street twice the size of Juniper Springs, boasting hotels, banks, and a variety of shops. The marshal, Thomas Donovan, welcomed Ben warmly and showed the couple to a small but sturdy cabin on the edge of town that came with the deputy position. "It ain't fancy," he apologized, "but it's sound and warm." Sarah explored the simple dwelling with delight. "It's perfect," she declared. "Our first home." Ben began his duties immediately, while Sarah set about making their cabin a home. Within weeks, she had also secured a position keeping books for the town's largest general merchandise store, her experience in her father's business proving invaluable. The proprietor, impressed with her meticulous work, soon gave her additional responsibilities. Life settled into a rhythm for the Vances. Ben's work as a deputy was generally peaceful, though occasional disturbances required his attention. Sarah thrived in her role at the store, earning the respect of both her employer and customers. Evenings were spent together in their cozy cabin, sharing the day's events, reading aloud to each other, or simply enjoying each other's company in comfortable silence. Their first Christmas in Bozeman was made special by a visit back to Juniper Springs, where Harold Blackwell embraced them both with tearful joy. The store was prospering under his partnership with young Reynolds, and the town seemed much as they had left it, though to Sarah it already felt smaller somehow. "Are you happy, my dear?" her father asked privately as they prepared Christmas dinner. Sarah's smile was radiant. "Happier than I ever imagined possible, Father. Ben is." She paused, searching for words. "He's everything I didn't know I needed." Harold nodded in satisfaction. "That's all I've ever wanted for you." As winter gave way to spring in their new home, Sarah began to suspect a change in her condition. The telltale morning sickness and subtle changes in her body confirmed what she had begun to hope for. She waited until she was certain before sharing the news with Ben. One evening in April, as they sat before the fireplace after dinner, she took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a child, Ben." His eyes widened in wonder, then filled with tears as he gathered her into a careful embrace. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." The months that followed were filled with preparations and anticipation. Their small community embraced the news, with the women of Bozeman offering advice and hand-me-down baby items. Ben worked extra shifts to save money, while Sarah sewed tiny garments in the evenings, her needle flying as she imagined the child who would wear them. Their son, William Harold Vance, was born on a crisp November day in 1878, almost exactly 1 year after their wedding. He had his father's storm gray eyes and a shock of dark hair that promised to be as unruly as Ben's. Sarah, exhausted but triumphant after a difficult labor, cradled him against her chest as Ben looked on in awe. "He's perfect," Ben whispered, gently touching the infant's tiny fingers. Sarah smiled up at her husband. "He is, and he's ours." Parenthood brought new challenges and deeper joys to their marriage. Ben proved to be a devoted father, often carrying William in a sling across his chest as he performed his less dangerous duties around town. The sight of the tall deputy with a baby nestled against him became a familiar and beloved image in Bozeman. Sarah, after a brief period at home with their son, returned to work part-time, bringing William with her. The store owner, having 6 children of his own, had set up a small area where the baby could safely rest while Sarah worked. As William grew from infant to toddler, their life expanded to accommodate his boundless energy and curiosity. Ben built him toys, wooden horses, and wagons, while Sarah read to him nightly from books sent by his grandfather in Juniper Springs. Their small cabin rang with laughter and the pattering of little feet. When William was 2, Marshal Donovan approached Ben with an unexpected offer. "The town council's appointed me as the new mayor," he explained, "and I've recommended you as my replacement for Marshal." Ben was stunned. "Me, but there are deputies with more seniority." Donovan shook his head. "None with your judgment or integrity. Bozeman's growing fast, Ben. We need someone like you keeping the peace." That evening, Ben discussed the opportunity with Sarah, concerned about the additional responsibilities and potential dangers. "Being marshal means being a target sometimes," he worried, "with you and William to consider." Sarah took his hands in hers. "It also means making this town safer for all children, including our son. You're good at this work, Ben. It's part of who you are." With her blessing, Ben accepted the position. The added income allowed them to purchase a larger home closer to the center of town, with a proper yard for William to play in and room for their family to grow. And grow it did. In the spring of 1881, Sarah gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named James and Elizabeth. The delivery was difficult, leaving Sarah weakened for months afterward. Ben hired a young woman from town to help with the children and household while Sarah recovered, insisting that her health was paramount. "I thought I'd lost you," he confessed one night as she finally began to regain her strength, when the doctor looked so grave. Sarah touched his cheek, noting the new strands of silver at his temples, evidence of his worry. "It would take more than childbirth to separate me from you, Benjamin Vance. We have too much living left to do." Life with 3 young children was chaotic but joyful. William, now 4, appointed himself protector of his younger siblings, solemnly explaining the ways of the world to the twins as they lay in their cradles. Ben and Sarah often found themselves exchanging amused glances over the heads of their children, marveling at the family they had created together. In the summer of 1883, Harold Blackwell came to live with them permanently, having sold his share of the Juniper Springs store. At 65, he was still spry but ready for a change. The children adored their grandfather, who enthralled them with stories of his own childhood in the East and adventures traveling west. "I never thought I'd have such blessings in my old age," he told Sarah as they watched Ben teaching William to ride his first pony in the paddock behind their house. "To see you so happy, with such a fine family." Sarah squeezed his hand, thinking of the long, strange path that had led her here. "Nor did I, Father. Life has a way of surprising us." As the children grew, so did Bozeman, evolving from frontier town to established community. The Northern Pacific Railroad's arrival brought new prosperity and growth. Ben's role as marshal expanded, and he hired additional deputies to maintain order in the burgeoning town. Sarah, meanwhile, had advanced to manager at the store where she'd started as a bookkeeper. Their home became a gathering place for friends and neighbors, known for its warmth and hospitality. Sarah, remembering the kindness shown to her after her rescue years before, made a point of welcoming newcomers to town, particularly those who arrived alone or in difficult circumstances. One such newcomer was a young widow named Clara Simmons, who arrived in Bozeman in 1885 with her infant daughter and little else. Sarah took her under wing, helping her find work and housing. To everyone's delight, a romance eventually blossomed between Clara and Sarah's father, culminating in a wedding that saw 8-year-old William proudly serving as ring bearer while the 5-year-old twins scattered flower petals with more enthusiasm than precision. "Did you ever imagine our family would grow in such unexpected ways?" Ben asked as they danced at the reception. Sarah shook her head, smiling at the sight of her father waltzing with his new bride. "Life has taught me not to try to predict such things. Better to embrace what comes." In the autumn of 1887, as their 10th wedding anniversary approached, Ben received a telegram that brought the past sharply into focus. Jared Hawkins had died in the territorial prison during an influenza outbreak. The news affected Sarah more deeply than she had anticipated, bringing back vivid memories of that terrible day in the desert. "Are you all right?" Ben asked, finding her sitting alone on their porch that evening after the children were asleep. "I am," she said thoughtfully. "I realized I haven't thought about him in years. He has no power over me anymore, hasn't for a long time." Ben sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "You know, in a strange way, we owe our life together to him. If he hadn't..." He couldn't bring himself to complete the sentence. "If he hadn't tried to kill me, you wouldn't have rescued me," Sarah finished for him. "I've thought the same thing. It's a terrible irony." "Not so terrible in the end," Ben said softly, looking back at their home where their children slept peacefully. "Not when it led to all of this." Sarah leaned against his shoulder, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "No, not terrible at all." To mark their 10th anniversary and put the past firmly behind them, Ben surprised Sarah with a trip to San Francisco, a 2-week adventure without the children, who would stay with Harold and Clara. They traveled by train, marveling at the changing landscape as they journeyed west. San Francisco dazzled them with its sophistication and energy. They stayed in a grand hotel, attended the theater, and walked arm in arm along the waterfront. Far from the familiar routines of Bozeman, they rediscovered each other as the young lovers they had once been, before parenthood and responsibility had gentled their passion into comfortable affection. On their last night in the city, as they stood on their hotel balcony overlooking the bay, Ben wrapped his arms around Sarah from behind, pulling her close against his chest. "Thank you," he murmured against her ear. "For what?" she asked, relaxing into his embrace. "For saying yes. For building a life with me, for our children." He turned her gently to face him. "For everything, Sarah." Her eyes shimmered in the moonlight. "We built it together, Ben, every step of the way." Their return to Bozeman and their children was joyful, the family reunion boisterous and warm. Life resumed its familiar patterns, but with a renewed appreciation for the bonds they shared. As the years passed, the Vance family continued to flourish. William, following in his father's footsteps, became a deputy at 18. The twins pursued different paths, James apprenticing with a local carpenter, while Elizabeth showed a remarkable aptitude for medicine, eventually leaving for schooling in Denver with dreams of becoming a doctor. Ben and Sarah weathered the changes in their family with grace, adjusting to the gradually emptying nest while deepening their connection to each other. Their love, born in dramatic rescue and nurtured through years of ordinary days and extraordinary challenges, remained the foundation of their lives. In 1902, 25 years after Ben had cut Sarah free from the rope that bound her to Hawkins' horse, they renewed their vows in a simple ceremony in their garden, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and the friends who had become family over the decades. As they spoke the familiar promises with voices now touched by age, Sarah looked into Ben's eyes and saw the same steadfast devotion that had been there when he'd knelt beside her broken body in the desert so many years before. His hair was silver now, his face lined with the evidence of both laughter and concern, but he was still her rescuer, her partner, her love. Later, as twilight descended and their guests departed, they sat together on the porch swing he had built when they'd first moved into this house. Ben took her hand, his thumb caressing the simple gold band he'd placed there a quarter-century ago. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Sarah considered the question, thinking of all they had experienced together, the joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges that had shaped their shared life. "Not one," she answered truthfully. "Every moment, even the darkest, led me to you and the life we've built. How could I regret any of it?" Ben's smile was tender as he leaned in to kiss her, a gesture as familiar as breathing yet still capable of quickening her heart. "Nor I," he whispered against her lips. "Nor I." As night fell completely, they remained on the porch, two figures silhouetted against the warm light spilling from their home, hands entwined as they had been since the day a desperate young woman had opened her eyes to find herself saved by a stranger who would become the cornerstone of her world. Their story, begun in violence and fear, had transformed into one of enduring love and quiet strength, a testament to the healing power of compassion and the unexpected paths that lead to home.